Sometimes a person believes that nothing new can happen in their settled life. Everything seems stable. There's family, work, established personal interests, a familiar circle of friends and acquaintances officially allowed into their world, and a steady home life with a loving wife and daughter. I thought the same. I was sure that by the age of 45, my life was fully formed, and nothing suggested any major changes ahead. I was born into a close-knit family. My parents lived a long and to a close-knit family. Happy life together. Never having major fights or scandals. My father deeply loved my mother, and she loved him just as much. I was an only child, but my parents did everything they could to ensure I didn't grow up as a spoiled egotist. After school, I enrolled in an engineering institute specializing in radio technology. I enjoyed working with electronics, especially since I also played the guitar well, and my technical skills proved very useful. I built my own sound speakers, repaired old electric guitars, and was always busy with something. In my 4th year of university, I got married. At one of our faculty's social gatherings, I met and instantly fell head over heels for a charming girl named Emily. She was at the party with her boyfriend, but I, puffing out my chest like a proud peacock, managed to win her over. After our wedding, my wife soon gave birth to our daughter, whom we named Marina. I finished my degree already as a young father. Honest, the idea of working in a factory for a miserable salary didn't inspire me. And then returned to civilian life. But unexpectedly, military service drew me in, and I became a career officer. I even completed military academy, though I never made any grand career achievements. Still, I rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel through lieutenant colonel. I had a family, children, and a beautiful wife. Everything seemed as it should be. One evening, after returning from duty, I hugged my wife and in a burst of affection said, with the right person, even a hut feels like a palace. Now I know the truth. No, that was a lie. I deserve better, Emily suddenly snapped, pushing me away with unexpected coldness. I didn't pay much attention to her words at the time, but I should have. That was the first warning of the changes to come. After all, as they say, a beautiful woman is everyone's woman. While I was deployed in various hotspots around the world, my Emily wasn't exactly waiting for me in loneliness. She entertained herself with a variety of lovers, and in the end, found the one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. By then, we had been married for nearly 20 years. Countryside plot with an old shed on it. Her lover hired a whole team of lawyers, who quickly built a case against me, claiming that I was abusive, unfaithful, and a hopeless alcoholic. When I returned home from another deployment, I was met at the door by a stocky man in a stained tank top. A strange combination of an ATM and a human vibrator, who flatly told me to leave immediately. Behind him, Emily stood smirking smugly. "Get lost," she said sweetly. "Maybe someone else in my place would have turned around and walked away, but I calmly took out my service pistol and ordered him to put his hands against the wall and spread his legs. To make sure my request sounded convincing, I even fired a shot into the ceiling. As pieces of plaster rained down, the two of them quickly complied. Without lowering my gun, I delivered a few well-placed kicks to the groin of my wife's new man. Judging by his pitiful squeal, my aim was perfect. I could have hit Emily too, but I refrained. She was still a woman, after all. Though in hindsight, maybe I should have. When the military police arrived and arrested me, I had only one regret: that I had been wearing my standard issue dress shoes instead of my heavy combat boot shoes. Naturally, I was immediately discharged from the army. But I had no regrets. If I had to relive that moment, I would have done the exact same thing. My daughter instantly took her mother's side. I accepted it as a fact, without much emotion, though my heart ached unbearably. I had served just long enough to qualify for a small pension, and since my deployments had included real combat, I had earned both a medal and a piece of shrapnel in my back. The medal I tucked away in a drawer, but the shrapnel I carried with me every day. It was lodged near my spine, pressing on a nerve and causing severe pain. Doctors gave me grim predictions. Over time, I might lose the ability to walk. With my military career over, I took a job as a safety instructor at a local school, but my teaching days didn't last long. The stress of my divorce and everything that came with it only accelerated my health issues. Soon, my left leg began to go numb and wither. It lost sensation and stopped bending. I could only move around with a cane. I lived in a small apartment inherited from my grandmother, fully understanding that this was where I would spend the rest of my life once I completely lost my ability to walk. The 2-bedroom apartment was in an old 3-story building by the river, next to a neglected park. To avoid begging for money from my parents, I started repairing vintage electric guitars and antique radio equipment. My skills as both a musician and a technician proved invaluable. What began as a hobby gradually turned into a business. Every weekend, I roamed flea markets, searching for old electronics among the piles of junk. Sometimes, I found real treasures being sold for next to nothing. One weekend, while wandering through the local flea market, I spotted an elderly woman selling an old electric guitar. Its paint was peeling, the jack socket was missing, and 4 strings were broken. A nearby man laughed. "Lady, did you clean the snow with that thing?" The man chuckled. "Might as well use it for firewood. Someone who needs it will buy it." The woman retorted sharply and turned away. The longer I examined the instrument, the more I couldn't believe my eyes. Could this really be a Fender? An old, battered one, yes, but still a genuine piece of history. I bought it for a modest price. The woman seemed eager to get rid of it. When I asked where she had gotten it, she said her father had brought it home from a foreign trip back in the 70s, and it had been gathering dust in a garage ever since. At home, I carefully examined my purchase, researched online, and contacted a well-known guitar collector in our city. When I brought the instrument to him, he inspected it closely, flipping through catalogs, muttering to himself. Finally, he said, "This is a 1948 Fender Broadcaster, one of the first of its kind. You just hit the jackpot, young man. What are you planning to do with it?" "I'll restore it," I replied. "If you decide to sell it, I'm first in line," the collector said, pouring whiskey into glasses. My business grew. People from other cities started seeking my expertise. I repaired and resold equipment. Discovering that many people were drawn to the warm, nostalgic sound of vintage radios and record players. My wife's betrayal had affected me in 2 ways. There was the pain, of course, but also the realization that new opportunities were unfolding before me. One thing I knew for sure: no new relationships with women, no marriage. I wasn't planning to avoid women entirely, but as far as I was concerned, marriage was freedom for a woman and a prison for a man. At some point I realized that my wife's betrayal and our divorce were actually my golden ticket into a new independent life. My perspective on the world changed completely. I embraced my new life, enjoying my independence, my growing business, and the absence of the burdens that marriage had once placed on me. Gone were the obligations, the compromises, the constant attempts to please someone who had already been looking elsewhere. My weekends were spent at flea markets, searching for hidden gems among discarded electronics, and my weekdays were filled with restoring old guitars and radios, each piece carrying its own history. One rainy autumn evening, I sat alone in my apartment, absent-mindedly flipping through a glossy magazine filled with wassy advertisements for things I had no interest in. The old wooden clock on the wall ticked steadily, filling the room with its familiar rhythm. I had kept my grandmother's home exactly as it had been, filled with antique furniture, a collection of tobacco pipes gathering dust on the shelf, and the ceremonial dagger my father had brought back from his time in the Navy. A few fully restored guitars stood proudly in the corner, their polished surfaces gleaming under the dim light. I wasn't lonely, at least not in the way people usually mean. I had no desire to socialize. The neighbors hardly knew anything about me, and I liked it that way. Over the months since my divorce, neither Emily nor Marina had reached out to me. Not a single phone call, not a message. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world. A month after I left, Emily's lawyer had called, arranging for me to sign the final divorce papers. I didn't argue. I signed everything she wanted and handed the documents back without a word. That was the last time I heard anything about my former family. They had completely erased me from their lives, written me off as if I had never mattered at all. I didn't hold a grudge, but Marina's betrayal left a wound that refused to heal. A father can endure anything. Poverty, pain, the loss of... A father can endure anything. Poverty, pain, even the loss of... love. But being abandoned by his own child cuts deeper than any wound. Melancholy settled over me that evening, heavier than usual. To shake it off, I reached for the old record player in the corner, carefully placed a vinyl record onto it, flipped the switch. A soft crackle filled the air, followed by the slow, sentimental melody of a French blues song from the 1960s. I had nowhere to be, nothing pressing to do. I simply sat there, listening to the music, lost in thought. Mind wandered back to a different time, back when women still wore lace stockings held up by garter belts instead of cheap, mass-produced tights. I exhaled a stream of smoke from my pipe, set it aside, and slowly stood up, wincing as pain shot through my leg. My gaze fell on a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the kitchen counter. Maybe a drink would do me some good, and some fried potatoes wouldn't hurt either. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Moving carefully, I reached for my cane and made my way to the door. Standing there was a woman I didn't recognize. The neighbors below. "Could you help me?" There was something about her eyes, something genuine, almost pleading, that made it impossible to refuse. Despite the ache in my spine, I grabbed my toolbox and hobbled across the hall to her apartment. The plumbing issue wasn't complicated. Shut off the main valve, replaced the faulty rubber washer, and installed a new handle on the faucet. "That should do it," I said, straightening up with difficulty. "Thank you so much," the woman said, reaching into her purse. "Please, let me pay you." I shook my head. No need. At that moment, a sharp pain shot through my back, making me double over. I groaned, gripping the edge of the sink for support. "Are you all right?" she asked, alarmed. I tried to wave her off, but my vision blurred from the intensity of the pain. Before I could react, she gently took my arm and helped me back to my own apartment. "Lie down," she said firmly. Protest, but she pressed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me onto the couch. Then, to my surprise, she placed her hands on my back and began to massage the aching muscles. A warmth spread from her fingertips, radiating along my spine, different from anything I had felt before. Not just the physical relief, but something deeper. Something I couldn't quite explain. The pain, which had tormented me for years, slowly melted away, replaced by a sensation of lightness. Quickened, and before I knew it, I was sinking into the darkness of sleep. When I woke up, the apartment was silent. She was gone. The pain in my leg was different. It wasn't the usual dull, throbbing agony. It was sharper, more alive. And then I realized my left leg, which had been paralyzed for months, was tingling with sensation. I placed my hands on the armrest of the couch, pushed myself up, and hesitantly set my feet on the floor. A rush of cold traveled up my legs as they made contact with the tile. I reached for my cane, but knocked it over instead. It hit my foot hard, and I flinched. First time in over half a year, I felt pain in my left foot. A shock ran through me. My leg was waking up. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. That woman, who was she? What had she done to me? The next morning, I hurried across the hall and rang her doorbell. No answer. I knocked harder. "Don't bother." A voice called out behind me. I turned to see an elderly woman from upstairs, slowly making her way down. "Apartment's been empty for years," she said. "What?" I frowned. "No, I was just there last night." The old woman shook her head. "That can't be. The woman who lived there, Olivia Parker, passed away last year. She had no family. The apartment was claimed by the state a long time ago." My mind reeled. That was impossible. I had been there. She had helped me, hadn't she? 3 years passed. My leg fully recovered, allowing me to walk again without a cane. My business flourished. I opened 2 more shops in the city, gaining recognition as one of the best vintage restorers around. Doctors were amazed, calling my recovery a miracle. And maybe it was. One evening, my past came knocking. "Emily." There was no anger, no bitterness, just indifference. She hesitated, then stepped inside. I made a mistake," she admitted. "My second husband left me. He took Marina and moved abroad. She doesn't talk to me anymore. I've lost everything." She lowered her eyes. "Maybe we could try again." I didn't answer. I didn't feel joy at her suffering, nor did I feel pity. I simply felt nothing. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. I stood up. "Emily, goodbye. I hope you find happiness." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. As she left, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, turned on the record player, and let the blues fill the room. For the first time in years, I felt truly free.